Hello, welcome to this Java break with BASIS. Today we're going to talk about automatic change auditing and replication for your BBX apps. Our agenda is going to first talk about what is change auditing. We'll have a look at the Audit Viewer, and we'll tell you about how to access change auditing and replication. And then we'll talk about an update we've done to the database and file replication, tell you about some new wizards and some new capabilities. It's going to be faster and easier. And then we'll finish off by briefly touching on what you need to do to make this work with Pro 5 and Visual Pro 5 interpreters using the BASIS DBMS with Pro 5 and Visual Pro 5. And then we'll take your questions. Let's get started. What is change auditing? It's a feature that we've added to the product which automatically logs changes to a selected list of data files. So any BBX language file operations such as a write or a write record, an erase or a remove, any SQL operations such as update, insert, delete, create table, drop table, alter table will all be logged in your audit log. Now that audit database is actually an ESQL database. In other words, when you make these changes to your mkeyed files, either via SQL or via read record or write record type structures, those details are written to the audit database, which is an ESQL table. It'll record things like the user, the date and timestamp, the operation type, and the record details depending upon the type of operation. For records that are written with an insert or a write record or a write statement, it'll show you the record that's actually written and give you the before and after record details. For removes, we give you the key value on the remove, and you could obviously then parse through the audit table to see what the previous values are of the fields. We give you the ability to query that audit database by either using ad hoc SQL. After all, these are ESQL tables that will contain the record of the audit changes, or you can use the Audit Viewer that we have built in to Enterprise Manager. Let's talk about the Audit Viewer. You can view a list of the audit operations that match a particular filter criteria, so date and timestamp, user, or particular record or file operations that were taken place. So one or more users, particular file, one or more operation types, and a timestamp range. So we have the new Audit Wizard. Let's see it in action. We're going to use the Eclipse plugin for the BASIS Enterprise Manager. We'll show you how we're going to audit a database, make a change to the data, see what that change reveals in the audit log. Let me hand over to Jeff Ash, who will take you through a detailed explanation and a demonstration of the new change audit capability that we've added to the BASIS product set.
Let's take a look at how to create an audit job, and then also how we can interact with the audit information once we have gathered that information. So let's take a look here at the audit logging item under the file system node in the Enterprise Manager. So we pull this up, it shows us a list of our audit jobs, and then we click the Add button here, and it gives us a nice wizard to walk through. So let's give it a name, and we'll call this one Chili Audit. And then we need to specify a root directory. Now this root directory is a location where it's going to create all of the audit databases. We chose to store the audit information in an SQL database so that you can easily query that information from reports, from your own application, or from within the Enterprise Manager. We give you a nice tool which you'll look at in just a little bit for viewing that data in a way where you don't have to specify any SQL or any complex query information, but we give you that flexibility so that you can query the information if you need to in a very useful way with using SQL. So we need to specify a location here for where those databases will get created. Now the database directory that we specify here needs to be completely empty because the only thing that should be in this directory is audit databases. And so for our example here, I'm going to put them in temp and chili audit. And then all of my databases will be put in there. Then I'm going to decide if I want to audit a named database instance or manually specify the list of directories and files that I want to audit. In this case, I want to go ahead and audit my entire database, and so I'm going to just select the Chile database here. So we hit Next, and now the next thing we need to do is select the database that we want to audit, and I want to audit the Chile Company database. We hit Next. Then we need to determine how often we want the database to roll over. And what that means is that when it rolls over, it creates an entirely new audit database that's completely empty. It leaves the old one intact, the previous one intact, but it creates a brand new one. And that way it gives you the ability to split out your audit information so that you don't have such a large audit database. So monthly, we could set it to roll over. We can do it daily or weekly or yearly. So you can specify the frequency or none if you don't want it to ever roll over. So we'll leave it at monthly, and then the rollover frequency, that would be 1 would mean every month, 2 would mean every 2 months it would roll over, and so forth. Now we need to specify whether we're using advisory locking, and then we hit Next. Now notice, as with creating a replication job, it gives us the list of directories that it's going to be monitoring for our auditing. And we could add additional directories here or additional files that we want to audit. But in our case, we won't add anything here. And then we also have an exclusion page where we can exclude directories or files from our audit job. And in this case, we won't do that either. So then we just hit Finish. And now we're auditing the Chile Company database. So we hit refresh there, and that shows us all of our current information here. Now we could pause this audit job if we don't want it to be auditing for the time being. And we have all those abilities right here. So now let's take a look at what the audit system puts together for us. So from here, let's first take a look at the audit database that's created. So if we double click on databases, we'll find the Chile audit database here, and you'll notice it named the database the name of our audit job and added on the date to the end of that name. And so that indicates the date that that audit database was created. Each time that it rolls over, a new database would get created. So you would see those additional databases here. But what we can do is double click on it and open it up just like any other database. And then we can take a look at the tables that are available, and we can query these tables just like we would with any other SQL table. But we've given you a much easier way of looking at the audit data. From here you could use SQL and build any complex query and extract the information that you're interested in, and you could use that from a reporting tool or from within the Enterprise Manager or some other SQL tool. However, the easiest way is to go back to our Audit Logging Jobs panel, and then we'll select our audit job, and we click on the magnifying glass. And what the magnifying glass does is that pulls up the Audit Database Log Viewer. And this is where we can look at audit operations that are done on our database. So before we do that, we need to come over here and let's make a change to our Chile Company database. We need to do some update operations that will cause the audit system to log some information. And so what we've done here is we're going to execute an insert, an update, and a delete so that you can see several different examples. Now you'll notice here in the new SQL Explorer in the new Enterprise Manager, you can actually execute multiple statements at one time within one of the editors just simply by putting a semicolon at the end of each SQL statement. And so we have 3 here, and when we execute those, then we get some changes made. And now what we can do is come over to our Audit Log Viewer, and now we can filter the information. So what we can do here is we can select from the log database that we're interested in. In this particular case, there's only one available, but each audit database will show up in that list as it gets created. We can also select from the individual file that was modified if we're interested in audit operations just on a particular file. So in this particular case, we have 3 of our files in our database have been modified, and so those 3 modified files will show up in our list. For our particular case here, we'll just look at all three, so we'll leave that blank. You can also specify a list of users that you're interested in seeing operations for, but we will go ahead and just include all the users. And then you can also specify the operation types. If you're only interested in delete ESQL operations or a delete record operation, you can put a check there, and then it will return only those operations, those audit operations that match that criteria. Again, we'll just leave that blank. And then we can specify a start and an end date and time. So let's go ahead and just leave all the defaults there and click the magnifying glass, and now that brings up our audit information. And then what we can do here is you can see each file that's been modified and the type of operation. And so let's take a look here at some of these operations and see how these look when we look at the additional detail that's available on each one of those operations. So let's take a look first at an insert record operation. Down here we have the customer table, the customer file that's been modified. We see an audit operation, and it tells us the operation type is an insert record type. So let's double click on that, and it pops up a dialog with information about that audit operation. And so it shows us the raw record value that was inserted into that data file. Now, if we wanted to, we could paste in a string template, and I'll show you that in our next example here. And that string template will tell us how to parse this out, and it will break it down into a nice table layout down below. And let's take a look at that now. So when we open up another operation, this one is an update record operation, and this happened on a different file, on the customer file. So let's take a look now at what we see here. We see an old record value, and then we also see a new record value. And you can look here and see these are the raw records, and you can look here and see the name that was changed from McIntyre to Ash. And if we scroll through here, we can see some of the values that are included here. But notice these numbers are kind of run together, so it's hard to tell where they are, where the separation comes in. So what we can do is put in a string template here, hit that, hit refresh, and now what it's done is it's populated these nice laid out tables for us, and it's parsed out the information according to the string template that we specified. Now we can scroll through, and you can see here it's separated out all our numbers, and now we can see that information a lot clearer. And this is very important if you're using a type I template column, or if you're using a type B or floating point or double. And so those types would show binary data that would not be useful on its own. And so by specifying the string template, we're able to see it nicely parsed and formatted for us. Now, the final type is the delete record type. And this type of operation will again pop up a nice viewer here for us. And it shows us the primary key value that was used to remove the record from the data file. And again, we could specify a string template if we want to. If that primary key value is made up of multiple columns, that might be useful for us. But on this particular dialog for the delete record operation, the string template we would specify would be one that would parse out the primary key values only. So it wouldn't necessarily be the same as the entire record. And so as you can see with these examples here, the log file viewer gives you a very quick and easy way to filter out information and return back the audit operations that you are particularly interested in. And then you can drill down further and see that detail. But again, if you need further querying capabilities, or if you need to process that information in a different way than what we provide here in this simple interface, you're always welcome to go in and run complex SQL queries against the audit database directly and extract the information that you need to gather your auditing information.
Now let's recap on database file replication. We mentioned we have some new wizards, so we'll take you through an example of that. But firstly, what is it? It replicates specific files and or directories. No code changes to your application required. We can replicate to the same machine to one or more machines on your network. We can replicate to one or more cloud machines. And we can replicate an entire database, all completely transparent to the users. So imagine here we are with your Pro 5 or BBJ application server with a BBJ primary data source. We can replicate to another drive on the same server or another space on the same drive. We can replicate across a local area network to another machine, and we can replicate across a wide area network, and we can have multiple replication jobs running simultaneously. So all direct changes to files are replicated, write and write record, and on discrete level just those changes are replicated. A remove, an erase, creation of M-keyed, X-keyed or V-keyed files, and all of the changes on those particular file types. All SQL operations are also replicated: insert, update, delete, create, drop table and index, alter table. And the supported file types for the discrete record by record or only changed, replicating only the changes across to the replicated database are for M-keyed, X-keyed and V-keyed files, for ESQL files, serial files, direct, sort and program files. String and other files are replicated via a brute force copy. So what are the benefits? Disaster recovery, obviously, a live database backup locally, off-site, and in multiple locations. The system remains live, your production system remains live, and users are uninterrupted. So you can create a read-only copy of the database to offload queries and reports to another server. So there's no need to have those run on your production server. They can run on the replicated server. You can provide multiple databases in closer proximity to your user base. So our new Replication Wizard is in the Eclipse Enterprise Manager plugin. It's an intuitive user interface, quick and easy to use and monitor. It gives you a step-by-step guided wizard. And you can also replicate that functionality within BBJ code or Java code by virtue of the admin API. So let's have a look at the new Replication Wizard, and in fact we're going to run this in a browser. So let me hand over to Jeff.
Now let's take a look at how we create a replication job in the Enterprise Manager. We're now using the browser version of the Enterprise Manager, and let's come down to Replication Jobs under File System. So we double click that. It brings up a list of all of our currently running replication jobs. Let's look at how we would create a new job. So we click on the Add button. That brings up the Replication Job Wizard. And now what we can do is go through here. It takes us step by step through the process of creating a replication job. So the first thing to do is to give our job a name. The next thing we need to do is decide if we want to replicate a named database instance or replicate a list of one or more data files and directories. If we replicate a named database instance, then it will automatically pull in all of the data files and data dictionary files that we need for our to replicate our entire database. If we choose to replicate a list of one or more data files, then we need to manually specify that information ourselves. So in this example, just to keep it simple, we'll go ahead and use a named database instance. In either case, you can specify additional files or exclude files once you get to that portion of the wizard. So in either case, you have the same power and flexibility. Just using the named database instance takes the initial legwork out in required to add the list of data files and directories that make up your database. So we select our database that we want to replicate, and we want to do the Chili Company database. And notice it also asks us if we want to create a database on the target. And what that means is that wherever we replicate to, the machine that we replicate to, it will create a new database name for us. And in this particular case, it's chosen to use Chili Company _replicated. That database name will point to our replicated data files. And so if we choose to perform queries on that target, those target files, then we can do that, and it has automatically configured it for us. So in this case, we'll go ahead and do that just to again, keep things simple. But if you choose not to, then your files will still be there, but there won't be any database reference to those data files. We want to specify the target admin server port if we're creating the named database, the database on the target, because that is how it will connect to the target machine to create that database. So we leave those defaults in place. We hit Next. Now the next thing we need to do is specify the target. And in this case, I'm going to just replicate to my local machine just to keep it simple. So I specify localhost. I'm now giving the port number for the file system server that is running on the target, and then a valid username and password that will be used to create those files and manage those files on the target. If my target system is using SSL on the file system server, I would need to put a check mark here. Otherwise, I leave that unchecked. Once you have your information in, it's a good idea to click the Test Settings button so that you can verify that what you entered is correct. And in this particular case, it is, so we're good. So we hit Next, and then we can specify a maximum bandwidth if we don't want our replication job to use up as much network bandwidth. We can limit that in some way if we want to. We'll just leave that at the default. And then we need to specify the correct advisory locking setting. And then we continue on. And now you can see it's added all of the data files, well, the directories that make up our database. So it added our dictionary, our data, and then it also added the config directory because we have a reference to a config BBX from some stored procedures. So we don't need to add anything else here, but we could. Now we could exclude files. If there were files that we didn't want to exclude from any of these directories, we could do so on this page. But we don't need to here, so all is left to do is to click Finish. We hit Finish, and our replication job is created, and it's running, and it tells us the last time it was in sync, which means it's all caught up now. Now if we wanted to pause this, we could select this, and we could hit the pause button, or we can do the pause when caught up option as well. So all that can be done right here from the interface. And additionally, you can do everything I just showed you using the admin API programmatically from a BBJ or Java-based application.
Thanks, Jeff. So we can also edit a replication job. We have limited editing of job information. We can also edit bandwidth usage, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, which files to include, and which directories to include, and which ones to exclude. Let me read a comment from Frank Anderson from Computer Outfitters. I've now had it stable for over 6 months, and for less than $300 a month, I have a near real-time, typically less than 2 minutes behind, off-site backup to Amazon of 20 directories with over 3,000 files on a system with about 300 active users. My primary data center is in San Francisco, so there's a real risk of going offline at some point. I've been working through the disaster recovery testing, and it looks like if I lost my main system, I could have all the remote users back up and running on Amazon within an hour. I didn't make any changes to my application to get it set up and working. So really a great reference. Some more detail though on Computer Outfitters cloud replication. They're spending about $300 a month. It can probably be cut in half by using Linux instead of Windows. And of course you can have Linux on your replicated server and still have Windows on your production server. Their database size is 70 gigabytes. They're actually paying for 400 gigabytes because they also have daily cloud backups that push up their usage and cost in the Amazon cloud. So your mileage will vary. You may be able to get away with just a few cents a day to be able to replicate your data to a cloud machine. How to get change auditing and replication? Firstly, just a reminder, there's no data conversion required. So even if you're running Pro 5 or Visual Pro 5 database right now, to move across to the BASIS database under BBJ's control, it requires absolutely no data conversion. If you're on Visual Pro 5, all you need to do is switch from the Pro 5 data server to the BBJ Pro 5 data server. And if you're on Pro 5, you need to install BBJ and implement the data server syntax. If you're on BBJ, of course, there's nothing for you to do. So just a reminder, imagine this is you running in Visual Pro 5 and BBJ. All you have to do, again, is to change your data server to BBJ. And there's some database configuration changes. There's no config.bbx for the data server. Instead, you use the Enterprise Manager to configure the BASIS DBMS, the Pro 5 data server functionality. And you use server-side prefix configuration in the Enterprise Manager. What that means is that the prefix will be searched on the server instead of going back and forth between the client and server. So there's better functionality, improved capability. We recommend you use FCB cache whenever possible. It keeps the files open. Of course, you can't use that if you're using the same name for multiple files. and you're relying on the prefix change to find it in different directories. We also suggest that you use the mode equals persist on file opens. What that does is keeps the network connection between the client and the server open. Some performance considerations. This is a fairly useful chart. The BBJ Pro5 data server, we've used here a 64-bit mkeyed file with 600,000 records with between 256 and 2048 byte record sizes, and just run through a fairly standard preliminary write, sequential read, and direct read. So a very simple test, but you'll see the performance is comparable between Visual Pro 5 to Pro 5 data server, and in fact in a couple of cases it's better performance. And of course, if you want really lightning fast performance, move some of your batch jobs into BBJ, use the xcall functionality, and you'll get more than 10-fold performance improvement in those batch jobs when running with the BBJ database. Interactive programs, you won't see the gain in performance improvements. There's no consideration necessary. Any read-write intensive apps, report programs, they could cause a network round trip. So we would strongly suggest making these more efficient using xcall functionality to run the program in BBJ on the same machine as the data. That'll give you a huge performance gain over Visual Pro 5. Batch programs, again, consider utilizing BBJ to run those directly on the server. And of course, some of the other gains you'll get is a scalability increase and a resource decrease, because the BASIS DBMS runs on a single process in the JVM with multiple threads for the multiple connections from the clients, whereas the Pro 5 data server runs a new process on each connection to the database. So that's especially important for resource-constrained Windows servers. High user count deployment will benefit the most from a move to the BBJ database. If you're in the Pro 5 and BBJ world, so if you want to run the BBJ database with Pro 5, this may be what your configuration looks like in a character-based environment. What do you need to do? Well, you need to add the data server syntax in your config file and or your code when you're opening a file. So add the host and port ID prefix to the directory name. We again suggest you use server-side prefix configuration in the Enterprise Manager. That'll search it on the server. And we also suggest using FCB cache where possible, using the mode equals persist on the file opens, keeping that network connection open. So here are some of the performance considerations. If you compare Pro 5, again using that default 64-bit mkeyed file, doing some very simple writes, sequential reads, and direct reads, you'll see again performance is very comparable in that environment, and you should not expect to see any change in your user's experience with interactive programs. There's no consideration necessary. For read-write intensive apps, we suggest you consider using xcall again to BBJ, and similarly in your batch programs. So if you're running Pro 5 and Visual Pro 5 and you're not using the BASIS database management system, here are the benefits by making the change. You can now start using change auditing and replication. No code changes to your application. V-keyed and X-keyed file types can now be accessible to your app, so variable length record or multiple key segments and unlimited key segments available. Triggers and store procedures. You have access to BBJ for integration tasks to third-party products, for utilities, for web services, for scheduling. And of course, you have access to the browser user interface. So a ton of value by merely switching across to use the BASIS database management system with your Pro 5 and Visual Pro 5 interpreters. Some replication resources. If you want to learn more, have a look at some of our prior Java breaks, enabling data replication and auditing for Pro 5, Visual Pro 5, and BBJ, database and file replication, and backing up your BBX data to the cloud in a heartbeat. We'll give you more information about how to do that with the BASIS supplied AMI, Amazon Machine Instance. So in summary today, we've covered what change auditing is all about. We talked about the Audit Viewer, how to access change auditing and replication. We've spoken about the new wizard with database and file replication, the update. It's been faster and easier. And we've shown you how you can start moving across, if you're still running Pro 5 and Visual Pro 5, to taking advantage of the BASIS DBMS functionality under BBJ. So let's take your questions.